Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Meet the Grantmakers panel. My name is Angela Richardson, and I am a senior trainer here at the Grantsmanship Center. And on behalf of the center, we welcome you to another wonderful panel, another wonderful conversation. If this is your first time joining us, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us. We have an amazing group of grantmakers that will be in conversation today. And if you are returning with us, welcome back. You know that each time we meet and we do these panels quarterly, we have great panelists and great conversations and great topics. So welcome back and thank you for coming. So this panel, we do them once a quarter, and we wouldn't be able to do this without our sponsors. So I first wanted to say thank you and just express gratitude to our other co-sponsors, Grant Station and Foundant Technologies. We wouldn't be able to do this without that partnership. I want to welcome our panelists. I'll introduce who they are, and one at a time they'll come on screen so you can see which is which. And then in a minute, they'll introduce themselves and give their foundations and give you some more information about the priorities. And then we'll jump into some of your questions. So many of you sent in some great questions. We're going to get to as many as we possibly can. So with no further ado, I'd like to first introduce Ciciley Moore. Ciciley is the director of the Office of the President of Special Initiatives at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in Grand Rapids. I was about to say Mississippi because of the MI, but that's Michigan. So Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've been there. Welcome, Ciciley. Next up, I'd like to introduce Eddy Zheng. Eddy is the president and founder of the New Breath Foundation in Oakland, California. Thank you for being here, Eddy.
Angela, happy New Breath, everyone.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Kelvin Adams. Dr. Adams is the president and CEO of the St. Louis Community Foundation in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome, Dr. Adams.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So you have these Grantmaker panel, their profiles. It's going to be, you probably received them, and we're going to drop it in the chat, the Q&A as well, so you can see a little bit more about these Grantmakers, and it's also available on the Grantsmanship Center's website. So with no further ado, I want to turn to our illustrious panel and ask them to introduce themselves, their foundations, and share anything that you'd like to share with our audience about your foundation. So I'm going to start with you, Ciciley.
Thank you, Angela. And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this learning opportunity this afternoon. I'm really excited to be with you. As Angela shared, my name is Ciciley Moore, and I'm the director for the Office of the President at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. We are a national and international foundation that is based out of Battle Creek, Michigan, and I live not too far from there in Grand Rapids, Michigan, just up the road, about an hour away. I have been with the foundation for the last 8 years, first starting place-based, focused on the west side of Michigan, and about 6 years ago came into the Office of the President, where I support our CEO as her director for special initiatives. And that means that I focus on democratizing philanthropy, creating conditions for historically excluded communities, family and children to thrive, and supporting our President's Fund and stakeholder relationships, as well as our Board of Trustees learning and development. I get to do a lot in support of families and children, in support of our CEO and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And like I mentioned, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, every day for us, we are centered around children, and we are asking ourselves, are the children well? And if that answer is not a resounding yes, then what are we doing about it, right? And so we believe that children, when surrounded by an ecosystem of support that makes it easy to access quality education, healthcare, and food, and their parents are thriving with good jobs, that children thrive as well. And so the priorities for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation are embedded in those kind of questions for us. So we focus on early childhood education, employment equity, health equity, food systems, maternal and child health, as well as doing that all through a racial healing and racial equity perspective and lens. So that's just a little bit more about the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. One other thing I will add is that we are also a place-based foundation. So we have a total of 8 places across the United States and Haiti and Mexico that we call our named places that we have dedicated a generation of support to and have colleagues that live directly in those places and optimize and leverage all of those strategies that I outlined around early childhood education, employment equity, health equity, as well within those places. So I'll be glad to share more about the W.K. Kellogg Foundation throughout this conversation. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Cece. I'm so inspired by what you've shared. Looking forward to hearing more. Eddy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Breath, everyone. If we don't have anything in common, I think, we have that breath in common because that breath sustains our lives. My name is Eddy Zheng. I'm the president and founder of New Breath Foundation. I use him pronouns. Currently reside in Lonely Land, Oakland, California. And New Breath Foundation is a national community-led foundation that leads the movement to fund, the grassroots organization within the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities. The 3 pillars of our organization is hope and healing, keeping families together, and movement building. And in 2017, I founded the foundation because I understood the inequity in distribution of resources within the National Institution of Philanthropy. When I learned that Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community receives approximately 20 cents out of $100, I thought that was unacceptable in a lot of ways. So as someone who is formerly incarcerated and had the experience the challenge of detention and deportation post-incarceration, I became the first grant-making foundation, in the country to really center in the experience of the people who are impacted by the criminal legal system and the deportation system. And in 2021, New Breath Foundation established the We Got Us Fund. And when we launched the We Got Us Fund is in response to the anti-Asian violence that's happening across the country. And with a fundraising goal of $10 million, New Breath Foundation offers the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community that focus on the work of supporting people who are currently and formerly incarcerated and people who have to deal with the double punishment of deportation and then the violence that they experience through the separation of family. And thus far, we are very happy to say that with the support of our grantee partners as well as our funding partners, that we were able to distribute $5.65 million, with that short span of time. And we are grateful for the opportunity to be able to continue to engage and learn as we support the most vulnerable population within the Asian American and Hawaiian Pacific Islander community. So I would love to talk a little bit more later on, but appreciate the opportunity that is created by the Grantsmanship Center.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Eddy, so much. Just your presence reminds me to take a breath. So thank you so much for that. Dr. Adams.
So first and foremost, I want to thank the Grantsmanship Center for giving us an opportunity to have this conversation. My name is Kelvin Adams. I'm former superintendent of Settlers Public School District for the last 14 years and a 45-year educator. I started at the foundation on August 7, 2023, as I retired from the role of being a superintendent. I give that framing because part of what our mission is quite frankly, is to really think about purposeful philanthropy such that it's really impacting the community. So we want to connect our donors with the community in a real authentic kind of way. We are the second oldest community foundation in the country, second to Cleveland, formed in 1915. We manage approximately $500 million each year, granting out an average of $100 million a year, is what we normally do as it relates to what our donors are interested in focusing on and supporting. We also do a Gives Day that really supports nonprofits. We average about $4 million a year giving out to nonprofits and a total of about $30 million over the last 11 years. We also provide services to our donors through donor advised funds and scholarships. And we also provide some administrative support to those family foundations that seek us out to provide some administrative services and support to them. The Community Foundation, as I indicated before, has really been focused on in St. Louis, Missouri, has been focused on the St. Louis region, mainly with about 86% of our dollars supporting the region. It's a national foundation in the sense that dollars can go anywhere, but those dollars are normally driven by what our donors have interest in. The St. Louis region is a very philanthropic region and a very giving region, so it's easy to get dollars to come to support the community. What has happened historically is that the Community Foundation has not always been aligned to supporting the community in a really strategic kind of way. So the board approved in December 2023, a different strategic focus such that we are focused on economic mobility and youth connections. On the area of economic mobility, it's about housing, it's about job creation and access, and it's about wealth management. So our dollars are our discretionary dollars, and our conversations with our donors now are to move dollars in those two areas to kind of support the community in a way that we have not traditionally done. The second area is youth connection, and I'm glad to hear my colleague is also interested in the area of early childhood education, which is a key area for us as well. The notion of youth innovation, as well as the area of scholarships. So we give about $1.9 million a year out in scholarships. The Community Foundation is focused around making sure that the dollars that we are managing are given back to the community in a really authentic way around the notion of equity, the notion of being transparent, and the notion of the level of integrity that needs to be done to kind of make that happen. We are really excited as a Community Foundation to make sure that we're putting the word community back in community and not being viewed across the region as elitist in any kind of way, shape, or form. But we want to make sure that we're touching the most neediest persons in our community. The staff is about 25 to 27 persons who have historically worked in the Community Foundation to make sure that we are providing those kind of services. So I look forward to the continuation, the conversation around what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And I'm glad to be on a panel with two really persons who really understand what this work is truly about.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Okay, so now that we met our panelists, there's a Q&A down below, so make sure you start adding in your questions. We're going to start with some of the questions that were submitted in advance. And as we're collecting some of your questions, you also have in the Q&A the profiles, again, just so you can see the certain priorities that each of these different foundations have and their geographic focus. They're all a little bit different, so make sure you take a look at those profiles. Okay, so we're going to jump in and we're going to start with the question around, it just seems like you all were leaning towards this. So I'm going to start with a question about funding trends. That was many individuals that submitted their questions about what's coming up for 2025 from your perspective, both in terms of trends that you're seeing in philanthropy. And then for your foundation specifically, what are some key items that you all are thinking about as we're approaching this new fiscal year with so many things that are on the horizon? So Eddy, I'm going to start with you and then I'll go around.
Thank you. I mean, there are a lot of uncertainties, in the next 20 or so days because of our national election. I think, we already experienced some of the kind of trend shifting, post George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. as if all of a sudden, we fixed that already, right? And so we have witnessed a significant scale back in, resourcing and supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, and the issue around all the international wars, the genocides that's happening, so all those really impacts the trends, right? And so far, I think that what is moving, from the philanthropic perspective is that climate change is one of those big trends, like people are funding, from many of the institutions, land back and reparation. Those are, some of the big kind of like a trends that consistently, holding in the center for many of the institutions. But I think moving forward, in 2025, narrative change is one of those trends that people are really want to invest in, because without shifting the narrative, we'll continue to be in a position of inferiority, right? When the narrative is being dictated and perpetuated by, white supremacy narratives. And so I think the narrative change in multiple mediums is one of those trends. I think continuously we see that the trend, regardless of who ended up being the president of the United States, the challenge around the immigration and deportation, and then the criminal justice, the connection, with deportation, which we call the immigration, we can see that significant impact the philanthropy institutions. So therefore, that's another trend that we're anticipating, because some of the pushback in the field against the trust-based philanthropy and racial equity and racial justice philanthropy. And so I see those are the trends. It really is an opportunity for philanthropy to rethink, like, how do we continue to invest in address systemic challenges and not just continue to create band-aid solutions and distribute resources that only can address the challenge right now before another trend is coming up.
Yeah.
So it's that way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Adams.
So I think Eddy did a really fantastic job in terms of articulating all of the kind of challenges that we're facing. And it's not just isolated to Eddy, but isolated to all of us on the screen, anybody in this space. I think one of the things that I kind of want to frame from a philanthropic perspective is how do we, a trend that I see, and obviously I'm new in this space, but a trend that I see is a trend around how philanthropic organizations, foundations, and the like can collaborate on spending such that the dollars that are being leveraged can have a greater impact. We don't have enough funds to do this work in isolation. The work has to be done in collaboration. And so the notion of how can we take the dollars that our donors have entrusted with us, in the case of a community foundation, to use those dollars to collaborate with the Kresge's, with the James McDonald's locally, or the Robert Woods Johnsons, how can we take those dollars and leverage those dollars in a way that we can impact big system changes, the kind that Eddy kind of talked about, because we're going to have another trend next year, and another trend the following year, and another trend the following year. But we have to be concerned about how do we impact systems in the sense that the legislation really has to change such that the philanthropic community is not always chasing its tail to try to solve some of these problems. We have to think about how do we change some of the systems that really creates the kind of changes that Eddy kind of framed so articulately. And that's the real trend that I see. I see a real desire by philanthropic organizations to look past themselves and not work in isolation to try to impact the kind of changes that need to take place. If we're able to do that, then we're able to have the kind of changes that can be lifelong changes, generational changes, because we can't do this 1 year at a time. We're talking about changing the notion of what happens generation to generation. I just read an article recently that the wage differences are no different today than they were in 1968 in terms of African Americans and Caucasians. the percentages are still the same. And so unless we unless we can impact the system kind of changes, we're going to constantly have these conversations about trends. So that's what I am excited about. I think Eddy kind of covered everything. Every single thing you can name, Eddy kind of covered in terms of what the challenges might be and what we see around trends. But I would frame a solution to those issues around us working together, philanthropic entities working in collaboration. That's number one. And I'll quickly say this: part of that has to be also part of what we need to communicate is that nonprofits need to do the same thing. Because just in the city of St. Louis regionally, there are over 20,000 nonprofits, and they're duplicating the kind of services that they're providing without having any kind of coordination. That coordination is key to them receiving the kind of dollars to make the kind of impact. So I see foundations working in collaboration to solve these big challenges that have been articulated, but I also see a desire, a burgeoning desire, quite frankly, for nonprofits to also kind of work together to solve some of these problems as well.
Thank you. I want to circle back to that one in a little bit. Thank you. Cicely.
I full-heartedly agree with many of the things that Eddy and Dr. Adams have already shared. When Eddy hit on narrative change, I'm like, yes, that is exactly it, and something that we share around what we're hearing and what we're thinking. The Kellogg Foundation just went through a refinement of our next 5-year strategy plan. And as part of that strategy planning, we interviewed our grant partners to get an understanding of what they're feeling, what they're seeing. And to Eddy's point earlier, they're feeling that boomerang effect, right? Where there was investments into supporting Black-led organizations and Black, focused organizations and BIPOC-led issues as well. And the pulling back on that funding now, right? They're feeling that trend of what's happening in philanthropy. But for us, what we heard from our partners when we went through and as part of this planning process is, again, narrative change is a huge issue that needs to be addressed, especially for BIPOC families. When you think about policies in education, health, and economic development, policy reform was another one, right? Focused on target policies. How are those being reformed for child-centered kind of change efforts? Again, we center everything around child well-being. Leaders, investing in leadership and investing in leaders. That is something when I talk to colleagues across the field, I hear very often is like, what are we doing to support leaders, especially leaders who are feeling in some sort of ways that they are under attack, whether it's the specific issues that they're leading or that are, it gets very personal to them as individuals or to the type of work or issues that they're supporting and leading as well, right? Environmental justice, right? People are talking about climate and environmental justice as we're seeing real impacts of climate change happen to communities. And so focusing on strengthening programs and addressing issues that impact children, like, air pollution, food insecurity, all of those things that have intersections around environmental justice. And then, I think some of the things that we've been focused on for a long time, career development, livable wage, things that you're starting to see are that you're seeing consistently in the news right now as it comes, around the political debates. Some of those key issues are still things that I think communities are dealing with, whether it's an election year or not, right? And so how do we think about this, to Dr. Adams' point, in a very systematic way? And I think also it's not about who we're funding, but also how we're providing that funding. To Dr. Adams' point, how can we be more collaborative? How are we thinking about ways to reduce barriers for people to access funds, ways to help them understand what opportunities are available, and ways that reduce their time to invest in applying for all kinds of different funds. So I think being more collaborative upfront will help reduce some of those barriers and access to funding. I also think collective giving is another tried and true way for communities to have power and agency about how dollars are spent. And it's something the Kellogg Foundation has been investing in supporting for decades. And I was just at a conference a couple of weeks ago talking about this very thing, giving circles, other forms of collective giving. And it's a way for foundations to be less in the way about who receives funding and who doesn't, right? And it's actually a way for those most proximate to the issues to make decisions about where funding is applied directly towards issues. So I think it's also, again, not only thinking about who's receiving funding, what issues, but how philanthropy is being practiced and folks have power and agency around decision making for philanthropy.
Thank you. Just a follow up, a live question that came in was since both you and Eddy mentioned it, there's a listener that would like you to explain what you mean by narrative change. You or Eddy.
Go ahead, Eddy.
Well, I mean, for me, that is the question, right? Narrative change means differently for people based on their lived experience and what they do in their community. But for me, the fact that as a formerly incarcerated juvenile life-term prisoner who spent 21 years of my life in the prison industry complex, the fact that I started a public charity foundation, that is narrative change, right? The fact that I'm uplifting the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community who are impacted by mass incarceration, deportation, and systemic violence, that is narrative change. Right, because we are consistently, being utilized as wedges, right, with the rest of the BIPOC community, right? People just think that mass incarceration and separation of families and the enslavement, as a result of the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, only applies to Black and Brown Indigenous folks, but it applies to all of us, right? And so part of the narrative change is really building internal knowledge of what narrative change is and how do we identify target audience and the people who are working in the intersection of the racial justice, right, the criminal legal system, the impact of deportation, the impact of continued systemic violence, against BIPOC communities. I think those are the type of narrative change that we're really focusing on. I think that lastly, I just want to share that this whole idea around never forgetting our history. Right? I just came back, from Montgomery, Alabama. I went to all the 3 museums that really uplifting some of the historical oppression of the African Americans in this country. And the Native Americans in this country, right? And yeah, I learned this, I learned the history, I know the impact, but again, just going there to just experience this deep atrocity and deep denial of human beings and their rights, and it's unacceptable, right? So part of the narrative change work is that how do we really tap into our chi. And the chi that I'm talking about is not just the breath that connects us all, but the chi that I'm talking about is culture, history, and identity, right? And so part of the narrative change is that how do we hold that authentic story that we each embody to our ancestors? And so that's the narrative change that I'm talking about.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This conversation so far, we've just got through one question, but the Q&As are blowing up with follow-up questions. So I have another one that I'm going to just share. This is 2 things. Dr. Adams, I think you mentioned an article. There's a listener that wants would like you to mention it again, or if there's a way to maybe drop the link in the chat to me and I can get it. I can get it to them. There's the article that you mentioned.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, great. And then the second follow-up for you is that they're really appreciating you and all of you actually talking about systems change in the nation, and wondering if you've seen some examples that have stood out to you of nonprofits that are working in like collaborative examples or nonprofits that are doing systemic change work that you think is notable. I don't know if any anyone has.
There, I hesitate to answer because I'm like, we have a lot of partners, right? And I would want
Don't want to
them
leave any
all.
partners out.
Yeah, I don't want
That's fair.
to leave any partners out of, out of this conversation and what's happening. I think there are a lot of movements that are happening currently that our partners are greatly contributing to. I think about one particular partner who is advancing. It's called One Fair Wage. One Fair Wage works to create livable wages, right, for what began as restaurant workers and has expanded to a lot of different industries and sectors that they're working to advance to make sure that folks have livable wages, fair work schedules, things that make it, better for them to support their families and children and to thrive, right? And I think about the work that they've been doing consistently to try to change the narrative about and help people realize who are working these jobs, why a fair wage is necessary. And it's kind of built off of movements of the past, right? I think about movements for farm workers' rights. I come from a small immigrant farm community in California. And I think about, some of the movements of our past, whether it's around civil rights or farm workers' rights. One Fair Wage is still carrying that work forward in this year to make sure that there are livable wages, for things. So that's just one small example of work that they've been doing to address systems, to really think about policies, to look at it from a state to state perspective. And I think there's many more out there that we can highlight an example.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so I think one of the things that is kind of coming up is, through the comments that you all have made and this idea of systemic change is, how we do these things. How do we do collaboration? By building relationships, right? Building relationships amongst nonprofits, Grantmakers building relationships, Grantmakers building relationships with nonprofits, and et cetera. So I want to focus a little bit on building relationships from a nonprofit perspective. Let's say I'm a grant seeker. For your perspective, what are some of the best practices for beginning to cultivate relationships with funders? I know for some of you have, I think, the St. Louis Foundation, and I believe Eddy as well. There's some of your funding opportunities are by invitation only. So that's a question that came up in advance also. So how do we start to build relationships in general with funders, but also specifically if there are, by invitation only opportunities? Let's see, where did I end up? I forget who I started with before. Dr. Adams, I'm going to start with you and then we'll go to Ciciley.
So the majority of our funds have been allocated based upon how donors feel, and they have traditionally set the parameters for how they want to see those dollars expended through donor advised funds or field of interest funds. So we have been, quite frankly, managed, if you will, or targeted in a way that we do that based upon how a funder wants those dollars to be expended. We are, for the very first time in a long time, using our discretionary dollars next year, such that we are doing this ourselves and using our discretionary dollars to grant out dollars in a way that we think is going to be much more equitable, in the sense that we are not necessarily targeting into nonprofits to look at how we pick 5 or 6 nonprofits. It's going to be based on economic mobility, as I said, early child education, and youth connections, if you will, the areas that we will be putting grants out and those targeted areas that we want to see the impact done in the region. We are also, for the first time, going back and having conversations with our donors such that we can educate them about what's happening in the community so that they can shift the way that they're thinking about funding different initiatives. But historically, it's been based upon what our donors want to see happen, and we have to manage the relationship of our donors in terms of making that occur. The other conversation, and this is one that I've learned, quite frankly, over the last year and a half, we have to spend time developing relationships. nonprofits are working really, really hard to garner dollars to impact the changes that they want to do. And they sometimes work in isolation because that, quite frankly, they're trying to raise funds to impact the community in a way that the community needs to be impacted. But they're not necessarily spending that same amount of time in terms of building those kind of relationships in a nonprofit space. And so I think there has to be some intentionality around how nonprofits find out other nonprofits that are working in the same space that they're working in and try to build some of those kinds of relationships such that when they come to funders, like a community foundation, they're coming in collaboration. They're not coming in competition. And if they come in collaboration, then those dollars can be used to impact big change. But sometimes what they are going to have to do, or what they're learning that they have to do, is everybody has to give up something. You have to give up something in order to gain the kind of impact they want to have for the region. And so my recommendation, suggestion would be try to build relationships with nonprofits that are in a similar place that you are, and then come in collaboration to nonprofits, to funders, if you will, such that those dollars can be leveraged collectively to impact the kind of changes that they want to see happen collectively, as opposed to doing it in isolation. There's some there's some funders or foundations out there that are really providing dollars to nonprofits only if they come in collaboration, because they want to build a muscle that you can only do this if you're working together to try to create the kind of changes that are necessary.
Thank you. Ciciley?
Yeah, so the Kellogg Foundation has an open application process. Anybody can go out to our website, see what our priorities are, and submit what we call a LOI through our grant making system. On the other end of that, once you submit your LOI, I have real colleagues, right, who are looking at the stuff that is coming into us and finding out where is it connected to our priorities, right? I have colleagues who have deep knowledge and experience working in early childhood education. They focus on that from a national perspective. Some of them focus on it from a very place-based regional perspective. And so when an application comes into us, say it's focused on early childhood education, one of my colleagues works to see where is that most connected, and they're looking at a few different things, right? They're looking to see, is it addressing this from a systemic change lens, right? Is it just a dinner or gala or something like that, or is it actually a program or an initiative or something that is advancing more systemic change? They're also looking to see, does this approach have a racial equity lens to it, right? Like who is making decisions about the proposed work on this, and is it done through a racial equity lens? And so once they've kind of determined that, then they send that application on to the people that are leading some of that work, right, within the foundation to consider for potential partnership. So that is one way to access, right, Kellogg funding, and that is a way that, like I said, is open 24/7, 365. You can go ahead and do that. The other way is to, I think similar to what Dr. Adams said, is to think about where other partnerships exist, right, within your community, and understand if there is a role, or if you're part of an ecosystem of other partners that are doing work towards a particular issue, and connecting it to that work and thinking about how you come in collaboration with that. There are many different types of funders. The Kellogg Foundation and our type of funding support is just one of those tools. And oftentimes we might suggest to you, hey, since you're in the very early ideation phases around a particular issue or idea, you might want to start with your local community foundation, or maybe there's a family foundation that really has an emphasis and a focus around this issue. And then we come in maybe at a later phase or stage of the work. It doesn't mean that we don't do early stage ideas and support early stage ideas. We absolutely do. But sometimes, depending on your level and depth in knowledge and experience and partnerships, it might not be a fit for us right away. And so there are many ways to access that. I think there's a lot of still things that need to be worked on too, right? Sometimes it's about relationships and who if we're being very candid about it, and working within foundations to be able to, bring awareness to the work that you're doing. And so building relationships, especially if you're in one of our places or other locations, to be able to build relationships with those partners that are working at the foundation as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You shared so many things. I want to lift up a couple of things that we share in our classes all the time, which is that, this question about relationships always comes up. How do I build relationships with funders? And, one of the things we often say is that apply to the foundation, and, I'm appreciating what you said about you have a team, you have people that look at the applications and say, does this fit? Where does this fit? How does this fit? And whether they get funded in that round or not, there's a familiarity that starts to come. And then the other piece that I want to lift up is, the idea that there's collegiality amongst funders. So you can apply to one funder. I always say that, funders are not ATM machines, insert proposal, out comes money, that there's other things that funders do, including referring you to other funders or suggesting other ways to either build capacity or build collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm appreciating amongst the many things that you shared, some of those two pieces.
I work in a nonprofit for the last 17 years. It's always a difficult time for us to build relationships and get fundings from foundations or sometimes even individual donors, right? It's one thing if you have a nonprofit organization that has a grant writer and have people have the capacity to be able to seek out grants, to apply for grants. Many of the grassroots organizations that we're funding, they have either they're all volunteer ran organizations or they have budget less than $100,000 a year, right? And so a lot of times they're just focusing on the work and the need of the community and not necessarily understand, how to really engage funder and cultivate funders in that way. And so for us, it's really, I think that's where the trust-based philanthropy comes in, is that how do we, the people who are doing the work, again, I just agreeing with Dr. Adams and also CC talking about the importance of partnership and relationship. It is through the work in the community that other partners who can be able to elevate the organization and the work that they're doing. And so the important is that how do we establish trust and then to be able to create access for other people. Right. So part of creating a seat in the philanthropic table is sometimes we may not be able to fund specific organization because the strategy may not be aligned or the funding priorities are not aligned. But that doesn't mean that we cannot share those information with other colleagues and other places to do it, to get funded. I mean, I think the other thing that I want to really center back on some of the narrative change, and this is part of the best practices, the narrative changes, that is how do we center a movement and directly impact the leadership, right? That who is really leading the effort, in the community and then also in philanthropy. And so it is important for us to really understand that the consistency and the persistency of engaging a foundation very important, right? Because the reality is a lot of board of directors, a lot of people in the leadership are the one who making decision on what trend to fund and how they're going to fund it. So a lot of program officers are strapped into they may want to fund you, but then they can't because that's not what the board wants. Right, so that's the differences around how do we make sure that as we engaging our grantee partners on the ground, and to make sure that how do we center them and how do we make sure that we collectively to be able to utilizing that impact that we're able to create to convince the board that this is something that they need to be resourcing in, and most important, trusting the people that they hire right, to be able to do the work.
Yeah, thank you. Cece, you were going to say something as well?
Yeah, I agree with Eddy again on capacity, right? And what it takes to fill out all those applications, and realizing that that is also a barrier. And I wanted to just highlight one other opportunity for everybody. And I think this is an example of where philanthropy can continue to collaborate, as Dr. Adams also shared. We partner with the Just Fund, and I'll be glad to share the link to the Just Fund. But the Just Fund is the nation's first common grant application platform. So they organize funders like us and others to put our money into this fund, where applicants can then save time, right? By just having to fill out one application instead of an application for each one of our organizations. And they do it in an equitable way, where they're, looking at moving money quickly to communities that are chronically underfunded and historically excluded from traditional philanthropy. So they also come with that approach and that lens. And so we've been proud to partner with Just Fund as another way to be able to provide funding, and again, not have to manage, some of the barriers with you having to fill out an application for each one of us. And instead, you can see what specific funding is available, submit one application to all of the funding that you think applies to resource your organization, and then, move from there. And they do it in a pretty reasonable amount of time, right, to be able to provide that funding once as a go. So I definitely recommend looking at the Just Fund and others who are doing things to pool funding together.
Great, thank you.
I was thinking about the same thing, because New Birth Foundation is part of the Just Fund. We're utilizing Just Fund, that as part of our solicitation, because we're invitation only. And but then for other people who are trying to reach out and trying to get funding, we always recommend them to go to Just Fund, so they can be more visible to other philanthropic organizations. And Yada Pang, who's the founder, is definitely a visionary in the field, when they bring our partners together. And I'm also a grantee of the Kellogg Foundation. I'm very grateful for the partnership, with Ciciley and your colleagues.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So, gosh, the time is going so fast. I would be remiss if I did not bring up this topic of AI, though. It comes up in every one of our classes that we have been doing recently. So my question is, there were in the questions that came in advance, there was about 7 questions about AI. So I tried to condense them into a couple. So, what are your thoughts about grant proposal writers using AI to assist with proposal development? And then also, how is your foundation using or planning to use AI, if at all, to assist with vetting organizations or proposals, or in any other kind of way, or anything that you might want to share about this very emergent topic of AI in this sector? So Cece, I'm going to start with you this time.
Sure. Oh gosh, AI, we understand AI is going to be vast and unbound in every sector of society, right? It's going to affect how we work, how we learn, how we communicate, how we care for one another, govern, and collaborate. It is going to be in everything that we do. And so I think to answer your questions directly about, are we using it? How do we feel about other people using it? The Kellogg Foundation isn't currently using it in our application review process, right? Or in any piece of that for, making any type of decision making around grants or how they're brought into the foundation. Like I said, I have colleagues who are actually doing that piece for us right now. We do see it as a future tool, right, that could potentially assist. But anytime that we're talking about technology, there's concerns, right? There's access concerns, there's bias concerns, there's all of those things. And I think those things are starting to be addressed in ways that, are considerable. And I think when we're more comfortable with how those are being addressed, that it can be a better tool to utilize in that capacity. But as of right now, our review applications is not based on any AI. Now, partners using AI as part as putting their application together, I think that's great. So the things that Eddy brought up before around capacity and folks being able to utilize their best time to stay focused on their mission and their movements and everything else like that, I think AI could be a great tool for them to utilize, but also recognizing that it has its limitations still, right? And you want to make sure that you're addressing and personalizing your applications for the particular funder, or if you're doing like the Just Fund, right? Like thinking about how you're really communicating in that capacity. We know that AI is very much, and access is very much concerns children and families as we center everything around that. And we produced a report earlier this year called Lighting Up the Future for Children, which is a tool for planning for the future we want for our children to inherit. And it's kind of this map of the next decade that considers all the social and technology and natural forces that are shaping our reality. AI is a piece of that, right? Of what we heard informing that report again from some of our partners. And I think those were some of the concerns that they had, right? How is this going to affect our communities? Where does bias have a role in that? And so I think it's an important read that you can read more about our perspective on the next decade and children and what we heard from some of our partners, and specifically talks more about AI and how that will be embedded as part of our technology and children's use of technology specifically. So more to read there.
More to come. Could you repeat the name of that study one more time, just in case?
Sure. It's a report that we produced in partnership with the Institute for the Future, and it's called Lighting Up the Future for Children. If you go to wkkf.org, just type in Lighting Up the Future for Children, you'll be able to download that report and read more information. AI is one of the elements in there. There's many more that we address as well.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Adams, how about you and the St. Louis Community Foundation? Your thoughts on AI?
I think CC kind of framed where we are as well. We're not using it in any kind of evaluating way. If it can be used as a tool to assist potential grantees with putting together grants and those kinds of things, I think it's another tool that can be used in that space. To her, I would just warn the notion of being authentic. I think it's really, really important that the grant writers understand that they need to be authentic, and AI can't write the grant for them because their voices don't come out in that grant. In the parameters that we are asking persons to apply for, at least the requirements need to be succinct to what the voices need to be succinct to what the applications are asking for. So no more than that at this point in time. We're monitoring it closely, as CC has indicated, and we are monitoring how we might be using it in the future.
Thank you. Eddy?
Yeah, I mean, people who want to use it to be able to, enhance their ability to be able to get resources. I don't knock on that, right? Because again, it's that capacity issue. But then there's a difference, like Dr. Adams said, when we read the proposal, it shows up whether it's authentic or not, right? You can't fake that. And so because we are invitation only and for grant making, it's recommended by organization and individual who have firsthand knowledge, right, of the organization and the work they do. And then we also practice participatory grant making, in our proposal process. So it's very important for us to hear, directly from organizations and individuals or people who are connected to them, right? So definitely, for us is, we want to stay on the ground and follow the ground.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just said lived experiences are just so critically important.
Yeah. What did you mean by, just for clarification, participatory grant making?
Yeah, so when we do grant makings, we have, we establish a community advisory council that made up of people or formerly incarcerated or directly impacted individuals. And they are also working in the community and working in different nonprofits and doing the work. So they get an opportunity to make recommendations on the organization that who we should be funding. And then they also have an opportunity to be able to review proposals, score proposals, and make decisions, right? And so it's part of how do we invite people that who are directly impacted, who are on the grounds, that they have the power and they have a seat at the table to make those type of decisions. So it's not solely from organization perspectives, like we make the ultimate decisions, right? And so I think that's what is really working for us. I always share this idea around, how when I had the opportunity in the past to go to sweat lodges with the Native Americans in their ceremony, the heat was so hot that, I have to bury my nose on the ground, right? So because the lower we get to the dirt, is where we're able to feel Mother Earth's nurturing and to sustain us. And I see the same, with the trust-based philanthropy and participatory grant making, is that we have to stay close to the ground and follow the leadership of those people who are directly impacted, right? Or the community who are directly impacted, and just utilize our leverage, to be able to support their work.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Okay, so we are almost at the top of the hour. I want to give each of you, a final moment to just share final thoughts, anything we didn't cover that you want to share with our, the hundreds of people that are watching right now and all those that are going to watch the replay. Eddy, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll just end with Cece, and then I'll just do some wrap up and tell you all about the upcoming panel. So just final thoughts for our audience.
Thank you, Angela. Again, I just want to express my appreciation for the Grantsmanship Center for, allow us to have this opportunity to share. I appreciate Dr. Adams and Cicely, to really be in your company, in learning and sharing. For me, it's about how do we center around these three important things, right? One is time. We can't get back time that's been passed or lost. We have to embrace the present, right? How we embrace the present is very important. And then the second thing is health, right? We have to center our physical and mental health as we continue to do this type of work. And let's not get it away from our mind that, we're going to live forever. We need to center that. And the last thing is knowledge. How do we continue to build our knowledge? How do we continue to take power? How do we continue to be able to engage in this collective learning and healing and a collective liberation process?
Thank you. Thank you, Eddy. Dr. Adams?
So I want to also thank the Grantmanship Center for this opportunity, Cece and Eddy, for their wisdom and their commitment to this work. And as I said, I came to this work after being a superintendent for 14 years, and I struggled, quite frankly, for a long time with this notion of the kind of needs that were impacting our community. And I'm on the other side of the table now in terms of providing resources to try to impact the kind of changes that I saw. As superintendent, I lost 171 kids through some kind of violent act in the 14 years of my tenure. A number that will always resonate with me. And what I learned, quite frankly, is that we cannot do this work in isolation. It has to be done in partnership. There's not enough money. There's not enough wisdom. There's not enough knowledge for us to do this work in isolation. We must partner together if we have any chances about making the kind of impact that we so desperately need to see happen in our communities. And the communities that have the real challenges that I know all of us here really want to impact, that I know your audience want to as well. So my three things are partnerships, partnerships, and partnerships.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Cece?
I again say yes and ditto to everything that Dr. Adams and Eddy have shared so far. I think what I hope the audience reflects on is that you have three people in front of you who have shared bits and pieces about their previous experience and how philanthropy is changing to be, again, more reflective of people with lived experience, right? Living and being in leadership positions, right, within philanthropy. And I think that's a beautiful way, an expression of where philanthropy can continue to grow, and how the perspectives of who's funded and who's not, right, is shifted also in that process. I also agree, I think one of the biggest things that when we're addressing and we talk about, for the Kellogg Foundation, racial equity, it's about power. It's about dismantling the hierarchy of human value, right? Like, how do we address that and think about how we support people in their fullness, not only through our funding, but in other ways in partnership that they're asking us to show up and be partners with them, and so, I think those are important values and important ways to approach the work that we're in within this ecosystem of philanthropy.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for this really rich, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversation. On behalf of the Grantsmanship Center, I just want to thank all of you for your wisdom and just for being here and for what you shared, not just with the audience, but all the work that you're doing in your communities and across the nation, really. And for the participants in the audience, I want to thank you all for all of your questions as well, the ones that you submitted in advance, the ones that you submitted live. We weren't able to get to all of them, but we appreciate you being here and we appreciate your attention and your questions. And of course, I want to thank our sponsors again, Foundan and Grant Station, for making this possible for this audience, but also for our field and for our world. I want to let you all know that there will be a follow-up email that will include not only this recording, but some other information, including the date of our next panel, which is going to be January 22nd, 2025. We will be in a new year and some new reality at that point. So we invite you and we hope to see you there. And thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.